Hi, welcome to the Whitey White Guy Show. I'm Whitey. I'm not going for lens flare. That's just what my lighting's doing right now. Today I'm going to review the film Freejack, which came out in 1992, and it's directed by Jeff Murphy, and the screenplay is by Dan Gilroy, Ronald Shusett, and Stephen Pressfield. It stars Emilio Estevez, Mick Jagger, Rene Russo, and then there's guys like Jonathan Banks is in this film. Anthony Hopkins has a role in this film. David Johansen, and Amanda Plummer, and that's pretty well it. In terms of names you might recognize. Mostly you're looking at Emilio Estevez and Mick Jagger. And so the story goes, Emilio Estevez is a race car driver, and again, this is 1992. And David Johansen, who, oh, yeah, look him up. He's Emilio Estevez's agent as a race car driver, and he drives. Well, I'm not going to get into all that because it's not terribly significant. And then Rene Russo plays his wife, and they're a young, the early 20s couple, early mid 20s, whole world's in front of them. Emilio Estevez, talented race car driver. He's going places. People are interested in him. There's a really pretty scene where his agent's trying to get him to sign for some kind of company to do advertisement and all this kind of stuff. And Emilio Estevez is like, I don't do corporate stuff, man. Corporate stuff. And so Emilio Estevez somehow hits another car, goes flying through the air, crashes into the overpass, and his car explodes. He's then zapped into the future, and I don't know if there was a year that was given, and he's what's called a Freejack. And so in the future, they developed technology somehow that if you know the exact moment that somebody died, you can go back with like space-time coordinates, grab their body, zap them out of there, zap them into the future, and then you find out through David Johansen some exposition that in the future there's no ozone layer, everybody's got radiation, diseases and stuff, drugs that you didn't have back here, and everybody's all rotted out in filth. It's very dystopian, and so rich people will buy a Freejack and then do a brain transplant and walk around in a young, healthy body. And that's you're getting. So Emilio Estevez ends up in the back of this truck. They're about to do the brain zap. They're gonna zap his brain, like clear all the data out, and he comes to instead which is you find out later he's not supposed to. And right as they're about to zap his brain, a group, again, very dystopian future, very everything looks third world. A group of I forget who exactly it was, but some kind of like marauders or somebody. So there's a theme here where you have he's a hot commodity, as David Johansen puts it later in the film, and everybody's trying to get his body because it's worth a lot of money. And so a group of marauders or somebody attacked the truck. Mick Jagger is the head of security for freaking was it? It was Anthony Hopkins' character McCandless. This guy McCandless owns the biggest corporation in the world, and again, Mick Jagger is his head of security. They get attacked. The truck like explodes, rolls over, something like that. Emilio Estevez escapes, and from there, it's a runny, chasey film where Mick Jagger is trying to chase him down. Rene Russo is a bigwig at the McCandless Corporation, run by Jonathan Anthony Hopkins, and Jonathan Banks is like the another bigwig who they conflict with each other, don't like each other. So Jonathan Banks has his own, plays a guy named Mark Michelet. He has his own crew, and it becomes like an allegory because it's like the future, but of course it's the past. So it's almost like a kingdom. And Anthony Hopkins, instead of being a king, he's the CEO of the company, and the company is his kingdom. Jonathan Banks and is like a duke or a lord, and he's vying for power. He ultimately wants to replace McCandless, who's old, and Rene Russo's in his way. Rene Russo is the widow of Emilio Estevez, who's not alive. And Emilio Estevez goes looking for Rene Russo, can't find her. He runs into David Johansen, who again was his agent when he was alive. And um, David Johansen, I'll skip that part. So it's basically Emilio Estevez running, he's being chased by this group of people, then he's being chased by this group of people, and through this dystopian future. While he's trying to find Rene Russo and, figure out, I imagine, where to go from there. So that's the film Freejack. And then, like I said, Mick Jagger plays, I don't know, like a head of security or like a mercenary type of thing. And so I'll do spoilers later because you can't not really discuss the film without spoilers. So, but that's your basic premise. Again, Emilio Estevez was zapped into the future, and all the different players in this kingdom, so to say, all the dukes and lords, and then you have just all the different type of people trying to chase him down. But while they're chasing Emilio Estevez, they end up fighting each other, and that's how he escapes often. And so it's an interesting but flawed movie. And this is a film that apparently underwent rewrites, and it feels to me like somebody sat down, wrote a script that there's a brief scene with Mick Jagger and Emilio Estevez has slipped from his custody. He goes to Jonathan Banks' office, who again is the second-hand man to the CEO, Anthony Hopkins, and he says, you let him get away, you're out the case. I'm signing my guys to this. And as he's getting yelled at by Jonathan Banks, Mick Jagger's holding those eggs. I forget what they're called. And he's like, 1916, right before the revolution, which would be the revolution, right? Fabergé egg. And it's like foreshadowing. There's I like the fact that it feels like, again, like a king. Like you got the king, you got the dukes and lords vying for power. As at one point, Mick Jagger has his staff. Jonathan Banks has his staff. They're fighting each other, and so it's kind of very Game of Thrones, 20-something, 30-something years before Game of Thrones. So I like the imagery, I like the themes, I like what they're going for. I'll explain that a little bit more when I get into spoilers. But I think what happened here was somebody started to write a more depthful, interesting, allegorical story. It's an interesting idea. You get just zapped into the future, and all that stuff. And instead of, up to that point, most futuristic films, everything was clean and bright and happy, and we're going to advance. And this was, there's been a lot of it since, but this was more, what if the future is a mess? Political corruption and all that kind of stuff, kind of what it is. So it was interesting. I like that aspect of it. But at some point, it feels like Total Recall came out, and then they're like, oh, forget that interesting sci-fi, deep, thoughtful movie. We got to make a Total Recall movie. And so, but then, the two concepts overlapped, and it became very sloppy and kind of a mess. So it became basically Total Recall. So instead of going to Mars, he gets zapped into the future. And now he's got to run from a bunch of different bad guys. But you feel like there's remnants of what was an interesting script at one point, and that's just gone and forgotten. By the end of the film, it just becomes basically Total Recall. Only instead of Schwarzenegger being muscle bound, so he's going to beat the crap out of some guys in fisticuffs, Emilio Estevez is lighter and quick. So he's got to use his athleticism. He's got his agility to get out of situations. And there's an interesting thing. I don't know if this theme was intended to be hilarious. It may be unintentionally hilarious. That every time there's a ploy, someone's double crossing Emilio Estevez. he figures it out like 5 seconds before it can help him, and then it's too late. And then again, this group of guys is about to get him, and then another group of guys is trying to get him, gets in their way, and he manages to slip out. So he's got to be crafty, he's got to be quick. Other than that, it's Total Recall. I mean, it really is. The look of the film is pretty damn awful. At times, I want to say it works. I want to give the film some leeway because computers were just coming in. There's a big, what had to be an attempt at like a sci-fi computer graphic orgasm towards the end of the film. I'm going to get into spoilers in a little bit, but maybe that looked cool. It's these two guys obviously standing between inside green screen and you're inside another dude's mind, and you're seeing all these backgrounds, and you're out in the desert, and then you're over here, then you're over there, and then you're talking to one guy on a computer screen here, and then he walks up next to you like, oh. And maybe 1992 that blew people away, but of course right now it just looks dated, old. It didn't hold up well. Mick Jagger's guys have these biker helmets that they're wearing. They're supposed to look almost like bishops on a chessboard or something. And again, there's themes there. The kings, the queens, the dukes, the lords. So maybe they're going for that look. So they got like almost like just really round biker helmets, and they're wearing leather. And then all the guns look highfalutin. And then all the various riffraff, they have AK-47s and stuff. It didn't work. I don't think they had a bunch of vehicles that armored vehicles they painted red and stuff. They tried to give it a futuristic sci-fi look, and some of the dystopian elements of the fall apart city stuff kind of that worked fine, but it didn't sell the future that well. I don't know if the budget fell through at some point, but just from what I've heard, and you can just kind of deduce watching the film. It feels like, let me read something from Wikipedia, maybe it mentions it. The role of Julie Redland was originally going to be played by Linda Fiorentino. That would have been interesting. She's a good actress. But due to scheduling conflicts, she dropped out, and Rene Russo signed to replace her. Shooting took place in Atlanta, Georgia. That's a problem. I'm glad I read that. At the heart of this, Emilio Estevez and Rene Russo are lovers. And of course, she thought he was dead. Now he's back. Oh my God. And she's a block. She's a block of wood, or she's a 2x4. For a lot of these scenes, she just seems really removed. And, you thought your husband was dead. I think it was a fiance. I think they were going to get married. And then he shows up, what is it, like 20 years later, in his young man form. Nobody really aged. I forget what the amount of time is supposed to be, but it's supposed to be like 20 years later. He gets zapped into the future. 30 years later, she should look 40 or 50, and she looks like it's been 2 weeks. Same thing with David Johansen. And so but I mean, it doesn't take you out of the movie, but it's the future. Maybe they do a really good job with skin and hair. I don't know. But that chemistry was just not there. And so I read that, and I'm like, that makes sense. She got thrown at the last minute. And I think that the film was trying to go for more of a Blade Runner feel, an interesting world building, introspective critique of humanity, political commentary on the world at large or something. And then again, somebody else stepped within the studio and said, make it Total Recall. That's a big hit. Make this Total Recall. And so I think that took the wind out of the sails, because Emilio Estevez, who's kind of hit and miss anyway, and where's he been for 15 years? But when he's on, he's really good. Playing Billy the Kid, Young Guns 2, he crushed it. Mighty Ducks, not so much. This is Mighty Ducks, Emilio Estevez. This is, he has some fun moments with Mick Jagger. They almost have like a brotherly rivalry, and that was fun. But there's at the very end, let's get into some spoilers now. At the end, McCandless is behind the whole thing. The rich guy, wants his body because he's fallen in love with Julie Redland, and he wants to take Emilio Estevez's body, so maybe she'll love him. Madness, love madness. I could believe it. He's actually, they say he's like in Australia or something. It turns out his body has died. His brain is kept alive inside the computer. And then they finally, Emilio Estevez and Judy Redland, Rene Russo, they go to confront him inside his own brain, inside this computer. And what was I going to say there? Oh, so there's a bit where they do the mind transplant, and then Emilio Estevez, you don't know, did it work? Because the Meshlet guy comes in and disrupts things, and it's like, did it transfer go through? And so when Emilio Estevez gets up and stands up and he goes, I feel great, I feel all stuff. He's supposed to try to sound like the speech patterns of the McCandless guy, played by Anthony Hopkins, who's Welsh, and his attempt at a Welsh/British accent is awful. And so it's like a key moment in the film. You're like, is that Emilio Estevez? Or, the character's name was Furlong. Is it Furlong or McCandless? Canless or McFurlong? McCandless or Furlong? Did the transplant work, or is this still Emilio Estevez? And his attempt at the accent is just so bad at the wrong moment in the movie, where it's just like, there's no suspense here, dude. I know you're going to be still Emilio Estevez, and the transfer didn't work. And so they end up shooting the bad guy, Michelet, and they do this whole ploy. And then 10 minutes later, when you think the movie's over, Mick Jagger and his guys show up, and he walks up to the door and reveals that he knows that it's Emilio Estevez. And then Rene Russo goes, and how did you get the password right or whatever? And he goes, he didn't. I lied. And it's like, yeah, we knew that 15 minutes ago in that shitty scene because Emilio Estevez couldn't do a Welsh accent to save his fucking life. So there's moments like that where you needed tension and drama. It's like, it's there in the writing, but the direction that Jeff Murphy just kind of shat this one out. And the actors just weren't giving it their best. It's just what it is. So Emilio Estevez is like mailing this one in. He and Rene Russo have no chemistry whatsoever. Mick Jagger is an interesting choice, of course, with Rolling Stones fame. And here he plays Victor Vicendek. Again, who's like the mercenary who's paid to do security or something. He's a hit and miss choice. He's an interesting choice because there's certain scenes that I like him in. When he and Emilio Estevez are going at it, there's like a brotherly competitiveness to it. It's not the traditional henchman bad guy who just wants to slaughter people. He's not just a sadist. He's got a job to do, but he's sympathetic to Emilio Estevez's cause to an extent. And so instead of being like, I'll get you, Emilio Estevez, they're teasing each other a bit. And he's half rooting for him, you can tell. So there's a bit William Estevez is driving in a truck, and they're chasing him behind all these tanks and armored vehicles. And Emilio Estevez has to jump off a bridge before he gets caught, goes flying 500 feet away, miraculously survives. And Mick Jagger, when he looks over the bridge, instead of going, oh, goddamn you, Estevez, he's like, if you drink any of that, I'm out of a job. So you can tell, like, he hasn't bought into the corrupt politics. He's not a sadist who just likes to kill people for doing so's sake. He's a guy with a job, and he's got to do his job. And he half feels for and half likes Emilio Estevez. And that's fun. It's a fun dynamic to the film. But the love story was erectile dysfunction. Like, it just, Rene Russo and Emilio Estevez mailed that part in. Did not sell at all. At the very end, when she finds out, at the beginning of the movie, she thinks Emilio Estevez has been killed. Then he's back, and then she thinks she's lost him again. This is this big dramatic moment. She should be tears rolling down her face. Instead, plank of wood. And she's just like, oh, that's nice. Oh, you're not dead. Okay. It's like, did you even like this guy? Let alone care about him? And it's, of course, the heart of the film. It's the love story. Jonathan Banks. So Mick Jagger, his performance is good, but everything that's happening around him at times is so unbelievable. When the environment is believable and the situation is well put together, he works in that situation. He does a good job by and large. Same thing with Emilio Estevez. There's a few scenes. There's a scene where Emilio Estevez, he just jumped into the water, like I mentioned, swims up onto shore, and there's this black guy there, this homeless black guy who's eating rat stew, and he gives this speech. That go watch the movie. It's one of my favorite speeches, and it's like a very dark, bleak, but go get him. That Millis is like, yeah, I can be all right. Let's go, and it gets him back in the game, kind of thing. I really like that scene. I all those scenes in all the films, I really enjoyed that sequence. And so Emilio Estevez, but then it's time for Emilio Estevez to say things, and it's kind of like, eh. So when there's a good actor giving a good performance from an emotional standpoint, from a mechanical standpoint, and now it's Emilio Estevez's turn to say stuff, it's like, so when he's acting next to some true pros like Anthony Hopkins, and Mick Jagger does a much better job than Estevez in this movie. It's like, now it's his turn, and it's just like somebody's little kid brother was like, came to play G.I. Joes with you, but doesn't understand how you and your buddies play your game or something. It felt like that. It's, he just didn't have chops. But when he was acting off of Mick Jagger in a bunch of scenes, I thought that worked pretty well. So his performance within the film is very 50-50, very hit and miss. He just didn't come with a lot of pop, a lot of power into the role. Jonathan Banks, again, he plays the primary henchman from McCandless. I thought he did a good job. I liked his performance in this film. I'm really glad to see him getting a renaissance in his career in recent years. He's been in all kinds of stuff. Good for him. I've been following him in various movies going back to the 80s, and I thought, why doesn't this guy get his shot? He'll have these small roles, mostly playing villains. It's like, when is this guy going to get his day? I'm actually glad to see him being in a bunch of TV shows and stuff lately, and in big key roles. Good for him. He does a good job, but his character is written as a turd. He's like this squealy little jerk who wants power. And so it's kind of just predictable from word go. The moment you see him, there's a scene where Rene Russo is in a business meeting. McCandless is supposed to be off on vacation or on the other side of the planet. She's in a business meeting with the Japanese. A bunch of Japanese businessmen. They're going to broker some kind of deal. Jonathan Banks, who of course wants the next guy in command, he wants power, but he has to be incompetent. And so he says, do one thing. She does the opposite thing. The deal works. And so you're supposed to buy Rene Russo as a business savvy lady who's a high up. I forget exactly what her title is, but she's a high up. She's making the deals on a world scale and all this stuff. You don't buy it for a second. They should have a clue what the fuck she's talking about, or she's a business savvy kind of lady. You really just don't buy her in the film. And she's right at the heart of the film. So Mick Jagger's solid. Jonathan Banks, solid. Anthony Hopkins, solid. David Johansen, I liked his role, his performance a lot. He's mostly just doing exposition for a lot of stuff, but these guys did a really good job. And then your two key characters, Rene Russo and Emilio Estevez. Emilio Estevez again 50-50 hit and miss, and Rene Russo just miss. And so the whole film hinged on her character in so many ways, and it didn't work for 5 seconds. She has a bodyguard. Let's see if I can pull that guy up really quick. Grand L. Bush plays a character named Boone. And he did a good job in this film. The guy who gives the speech I was talking about, the hobo who gives the impassioned speech, Frankie Faison, Faison. They call him Eagle Man and stuff. He gives that speech. He does a really good job. So this is a classic case of your support characters are acting their asses off, and that's the saving grace of the film. That's the reason why I'm even talking about it, going on half an hour about it, is the support characters gave good performances and made the film interesting. But Rene Russo shed a brick. I mean, just nothing, just lifeless. So to her defense, she got thrown in at the last minute. Obviously, really didn't believe in the story or care. John Shea has a small role. He does a good job. Mike stars in this? Huh, who's Mike Starr in this movie? I'm gonna have to go watch it again. But yeah, really good support cast. George Coleman. I'm not gonna be able to say his name. I gotta go find Mike Starr in this movie. I don't remember seeing him in this film. Wilbur Fitzgerald, Daryl Witcher. These guys, it had everything. Everything else was working, but your leads. I mean, what do you do? So you know, certain scenes worked well. Certain aspects of the film worked well, but the film did not come together as a whole. So it's, to me, if you're the type of person watching this show, Freejack came out in 1992. It's worth a viewing. It's a fun runny chasey action adventure set in the future. I enjoy the film. It just has flaws, plain and simple. So that's my review of Freejack. I'll probably revisit it later with edited clips and stuff, and maybe less light hitting you from the back. Although this whole blue thing is working kind of. Where's that even coming from? Anyway, thanks for watching Whitey White Guy Show. I'm Whitey. Enjoyed having you here, and like, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your mom, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.